Ever feel like you're walking a tightrope? You know?
Oh,
Balancing transparency and control, especially when everything's on the line.
yeah.
Well, that's the daily life of a public information officer, a PIO.
Right.
And today, we're diving deep into their world through a really unique lens, actually.
Oh!
Yeah, a whole stack of podcast episode titles from the PIO podcast Life of a PIO.
It's like we've got this backstage pass to the minds of these communication masters, right? We see their challenges, their anxieties, their strategies, all distilled into these really catchy titles.
It's like a gold mine of insights, honestly. I was just glancing at the list earlier, and all these recurring themes, they just pop out at you. Crisis communication, community engagement, internal comms, working with the media, navigating those crazy elections. It's a lot to juggle. I don't know where to even begin.
Well, one episode title kind of grabbed my attention right away. Golden Hour, Mastering the First 60 Minutes of Crisis. I think that highlights, the immense pressure and the strategic thinking they need in this field.
Golden hour. That sounds intense. What is that exactly?
So it's not about statues or anything like that. It's about that very first hour after a crisis breaks. It's a time when information or the lack of it can really make or break an organization's reputation, even public safety, even the entire outcome.
So it's not just about reacting quickly. It's about reacting, smartly.
Exactly. Think about it. In that first hour, PIOs, they're facing this just deluge of information. And it's often conflicting, unverified. They have to sort through everything, Find those critical facts, craft a clear message, and get it out to the public fast, all while staying calm, projecting this aura of calm amidst the chaos.
Phew. That's a tall order. I can see why they dedicate entire podcast episodes to just that first hour.
No.
What happens if they mess up that initial response? What are the consequences?
Oh, they can be big. Misinformation can spread so fast, panic sets in, people lose trust in the organization. We've seen this happen, countless times, right? Natural disasters, corporate scandals. The golden hour is all about getting ahead of the story, shaping how the public sees things before it's too late.
Wow. Makes you realize how much weight is on every word they choose. Speaking of words, another theme that kind of jumps out from these episode titles, storytelling. There's the perfect pitch, crafting stories reporters want, and then another one specifically for police PIOs. What's with all this storytelling? This is a field that seems so focused on facts and information.
Well, that's where we see how subtle, how effective PIO work can be. Dry facts and figures, they rarely stick with people. But a good story, a well-told story, it can resonate for years even. It can really shape public opinion and, even drive action.
So it's about connecting with audiences, but on a deeper level, making information more memorable, more impactful.
Precisely. And effective storytelling for PIOs and police departments, that suggests there are, nuances depending on the audience. Police PIOs, for example, they might focus on stories that build trust and understanding between, law enforcement and the community, especially in situations that are already sensitive.
Yeah. Especially then.
Think about a story that humanizes police officers, showcases their dedication, the challenges they face. That can be powerful.
That makes sense. A good story can, break down barriers, create empathy in a way that a press release just never could. But don't they have to be careful not to seem, manipulative or like they're spinning the narrative too much?
That's the tightrope, right, that they're constantly walking.
Sure.
Control and transparency. And that tension is right there in another episode title, Post-Crisis Communication, Rebuilding Trust and Credibility. It's not just about managing that initial crisis, it's the long game, the ongoing relationship between the organization and the public.
So they're not just reacting to events, they're actively shaping the narrative over time. Building trust, earning credibility, that sounds like a long and delicate process, especially when you consider the ethical dilemmas that PIOs face, right? That one episode, Gatekeeping, Guardian of an Organization's Image, it kind of hints at that struggle. What's the ethical tightrope they're walking?
It comes down to this, really. They are responsible for protecting their organization's reputation, but they also have this obligation to the public to be truthful and transparent. And sometimes those two goals, they clash.
It's like they're constantly weighing competing priorities. On the one hand, they want to, present the organization in the best light, but then on the other hand, they can't afford to look like they're hiding information or misleading the public.
Exactly. And that's when things get ethically complex. What happens when an organization makes a mistake or, faces a scandal? How much information should they release? How quickly? What's the best way to frame the situation without, downplaying it, but also not causing unnecessary panic? Those are the questions that keep PIOs up at night.
And it's not just, crisis situations, is it? Even in day-to-day operations, there are bound to be sensitive topics and potentially conflicting perspectives that PIOs have to navigate.
Absolutely. Think about public health emergencies,
Mm.
environmental disasters, or even, just major changes within the organization. You're going to have strong opinions, lots of emotions involved, and the PIO needs to be able to communicate effectively without, alienating anyone.
It's like they need to be masters of diplomacy and communication. Speaking of potentially tricky situations, one episode title that really caught my eye, Navigating Election Season, Ensuring Bias-Free and Neutral Communication. How do PIOs, especially those working in government agencies, how do they stay impartial in such a, politically charged environment?
That's one of the biggest challenges they face, honestly, and it requires a deep understanding of, election laws and ethics, as well as just meticulous attention to language. They have to provide accurate information about the election process, candidate platforms, voting procedures, without appearing to favor, any particular candidate or party. Even a seemingly neutral statement can be interpreted as taking sides. So they have to be so incredibly careful about their word choice, the information they share, and even how they present it.
It's like walking a tightrope blindfolded, as you said earlier. But why is it so crucial for them to remain neutral? What are the potential consequences if they don't?
The stakes are really high during an election, right? Public trust in the democratic process, that's paramount. And if a government PIO is seen as biased or partisan, well, it can undermine that trust. It can also lead to accusations of impropriety, legal challenges, and even damage the reputation of the agency they represent.
So it's not just about protecting their own careers. It's about upholding the integrity of the entire electoral system. That's a heavy responsibility.
It is, and it highlights the critical role that PIOs play in our society.
Mm-hmm.
They are often the bridge between complex organizations and the public, responsible for conveying information, building trust, and ensuring transparency.
It's starting to feel less like they're just communicating and more like they're juggling chainsaws while walking that tightrope. But even with all these challenges, I'm starting to see how their work can be incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, you're right. They have the opportunity to make a real difference by connecting people with information, helping organizations navigate really difficult situations, and ultimately contributing to, a more informed and engaged public.
And speaking of an informed and engaged public, we've been focusing a lot on the challenges they face. But I'm kind of curious what we can learn from them. What are some of the key takeaways that our listeners can apply to their own lives, even if they're not professional communicators?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore, a bit deeper in the next part of our deep dive. But I can tell you this, PIOs, they are masters of clear, concise, and empathetic communication. And those are skills that are valuable anywhere, whether you're giving a presentation at work, writing an email, or even just having, a tough conversation with a friend or family member.
I'm really starting to see the connections here. It's not just about mastering specific, techniques. It's about understanding the principles of effective communication and applying them to any situation, where you need to inform, persuade, connect with others.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, right? It's not just about the work of PIOs. It's about empowering everyone to become more effective communicators in all aspects of their lives.
We were just talking about some of those ethical dilemmas that PIOs have to deal with. Remember that episode titled Gatekeeping, Guardian of an Organization's Image? It's like they're guarding this vault of information.
Yeah.
Deciding what gets out and what stays locked away.
And it's not always as simple as, good information versus bad information. What about a situation where, let's say, an organization is making internal changes, stuff that could impact jobs, but the details, they're not finalized yet.
Yeah.
Releasing that too early, it could cause a lot of anxiety, even if, in the end, it's all for the best.
So it's not about hiding the truth. It's about timing and context.
Exactly. PIOs, they need to weigh the potential harm of, releasing something versus the harm of holding back. It's a judgment call, and there's rarely a clear-cut answer.
That makes me think about that golden hour concept again. In a crisis, those judgment calls, they have to be made under intense pressure with limited information. I'm starting to get a whole new level of respect for these people.
It's not a job for everyone, that's for sure. And that brings us back to preparation. Remember that episode title we saw? Realistic Simulations, the key to effective emergency training. It highlights how PIOs actually, prepare for these high-stakes situations.
Simulation, so they're not just like reading manuals and crossing their fingers.
No, not at all. Effective training, it involves putting them through mock crises, throwing curveballs at them, forcing them to make decisions under pressure and deal with, the unexpected.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You can't replicate that chaos of a real crisis until you've at least tried to simulate it. It's like training for a marathon. You don't just show up on race day and hope for the best.
Exactly. Practice, it builds muscle memory, right? Not just for physical tasks,
Yeah.
but for mental agility, decision making. The more they can rehearse, the better they'll be when the real thing happens.
And that prep, that probably helps them, stay calm and focused in those first few crucial moments. I'm curious, though, about the other end of the spectrum. We talked about the golden hour. But what about the long game? How do PIOs navigate the aftermath of a crisis and rebuild trust, especially if things went wrong?
Well, that's where episodes like post-crisis communication, rebuilding trust and credibility come in. It's about acknowledging mistakes, taking responsibility, showing a commitment to transparency and accountability.
So it's not about sweeping things under the rug and hoping everyone forgets.
Oh, no. That's a recipe for disaster. People, they can sense a cover-up, authenticity, transparency. Those are essential in the long run. It's about admitting when things didn't go as planned, outlining steps to fix it, and showing a genuine desire to learn from it.
It sounds like they need to be experts in damage control, but not in a shady spin doctor kind of way, more like reputation surgeons, carefully repairing the damage, fostering healing.
I like that analogy. And it brings up another important piece of PIO work, empathy. Remember those episodes about storytelling? Same principle applies here. It's about understanding the concerns of the public, acknowledging those pain points and communicating with compassion, with sincerity.
So it's not just about conveying information. It's about connecting with people on an emotional level. Makes me wonder, with all these different skills and qualities required, how do they even find people who can do all this?
Well, the PIO field, it's pretty diverse. People come from all sorts of backgrounds: journalism, public relations, marketing, even law enforcement. It's less about where they come from and more about being able to synthesize all those different skill sets into a, cohesive approach.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of job. Different organizations, different situations, different crises, they all call for, different approaches.
Exactly. Imagine a PIO for a tech startup versus one for a government agency. Totally different contexts, different audiences, different communication styles.
That reminds me of another episode title, Stakeholder Analysis. Identifying your key information audiences. Seems like a fundamental step even before crafting a message is understanding who you're talking to.
Absolutely critical. A message that resonates with one audience might totally flop with another. PIOs, they need to tailor their style, their language, even the channels they use, reach the right people the right way.
It's like this complex puzzle where each piece has to fit just right. And we haven't even talked about the nuances of all the different communication mediums.
Oh, that's a whole other layer for sure. We live in this world that's just saturated with information, newspapers, television, competing with social media, blogs, online forums. PIOs need to be masters of, multi-platform communication.
So they need to be fluent in Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all while staying accurate and professional. It's like they're conducting an orchestra of information, making sure all the instruments are playing in harmony.
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? It's not just about sending out press releases and hoping for the best. It's about strategically, orchestrating this whole symphony of communication, using every tool they have to reach the right audience with the right message at the right time.
I'm starting to get why they call it the PIO podcast, Life of a PIO.
Right.
It's more than just a job title. It's like a way of life, a constant balancing act, a perpetual state of learning and adapting.
You got it. And that brings us to another important takeaway. PIOs, they're lifelong learners. They're constantly evolving, refining their skills, staying on top of new technologies, new trends in communication.
So it's not just about what they know. It's about their willingness to keep learning, to adapt, to, embrace new challenges. It's like they're in this perpetual state of beta testing, always iterating, always improving.
And that's a mindset that we can all benefit from, right? It's not about having all the answers. It's about being curious, asking questions, being open to, new perspectives.
That's a great point. We've been so focused on the technical stuff,
Right.
but it really comes down to a set of core values: curiosity, empathy, adaptability, a commitment to, truth and transparency.
You're getting at something essential here. These aren't just skills you learn from a book. They're qualities. cultivated over time, through experience, through challenges, through a genuine desire to connect with others and make a positive impact.
And those are qualities that are valuable anywhere, in any field, in any aspect of life, really.
Exactly. Whether you're, leading a team, building a business, or just navigating the complexities of your relationships, the principles of effective communication, they're universal.
So even though we've been deep diving into this world of PIOs, it's really like a journey of self-discovery too, isn't it?
Mhm.
A way to examine our own communication habits and find ways to improve.
You're absolutely right. And speaking of self-discovery, I think it's time we shift gears a bit. Talk about what we as individuals can learn from these communication masters. What are some of the specific skills, the strategies they use that, we can all benefit from?
That's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive. We'll unpack some key takeaways, explore how these PIO insights can be applied to our own lives. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit from, the high-stakes world of PIOs to something a little closer to home for all of us.
Right.
We've been unpacking all their challenges and strategies, but what I'm really wondering is, what can we learn from these masters of the message? Us everyday communicators.
Well, it's amazing how the skills that make a PIO so good in a crisis, or, even during something like an election, they're actually pretty relevant to our everyday interactions, even when we're not facing, a room full of reporters.
For sure. So let's break it down. What's like the first PIO-inspired communication superpower that we can all add to our arsenal?
I'd say that laser focus on clarity and conciseness. It's a skill they develop under that golden hour pressure. Think about it. How often do we get lost in the weeds, overwhelm people with too many details or, all that jargon?
Ooh, yeah. Guilty is charged. I can sometimes get carried away. With the background, the context, the tangents. But you're saying that PIOs are masters of just cutting to the chase,
Right.
delivering that core message without all the fluff.
Exactly. They know that in a crisis or even just a regular briefing, every word matters. They've trained themselves to take complex information and distill it down into these easily digestible nuggets. So their message, it really lands.
That's got to be a valuable skill in, any communication situation, like whether you're pitching an idea at work, explaining something complicated to a friend, or even just like trying to get your point across in an argument.
It all comes down to, respecting your audience's time, their attention. PIOs know people are just bombarded with information all the time. So to break through the noise, you got to be clear, concise, and get to the point quickly.
Okay, so step one, channel your inner PIO, ditch the wordiness. What else can we borrow from their playbook?
Well, remember all those episode titles about storytelling? It wasn't just about crafting narratives for the media. PIOs really understand that stories have this power to connect with people on an emotional level, make information memorable, and even influence behavior.
It's funny because we think of storytelling as something that, novelists or filmmakers do. But you're saying it's crucial for anyone who wants to be a better communicator.
Absolutely. Think about a time when someone shared a personal story with you, and it just totally changed your perspective or inspired you to do something. Stories can kind of bypass our logical defenses and speak right to our hearts.
Yeah, that's true. We're wired for stories, aren't we? They help us make sense of things, connect with others, and we definitely remember things better when there's a story attached. But how do we apply that to our everyday conversations? I mean, we're not going to start giving TED Talks at the dinner table, right?
No, it doesn't have to be that formal. It's just about finding ways to, weave little narratives into what you're saying. Whether you're sharing a personal experience to illustrate a point, using an analogy, or even just adding a bit of humor, a bit of your personality.
So it's not about like being a master storyteller. It's about recognizing the power of narrative and finding little ways to use it.
Exactly. And that actually leads us to another key PIO insight: empathy.
Right. We talked about how they often have to deal with, really sensitive situations, connect with people who might be feeling all sorts of things: fear, anger, grief, confusion.
Yeah, it's not just about conveying the information, it's about understanding where your audience is emotionally, acknowledging their concerns, communicating with compassion, with sincerity.
I get that. Sometimes when I'm trying to explain something, I get so focused on being, right or logical that I forget to think about their perspective, how they might be feeling.
It's a common trap, honestly. But PIOs, because of what they do, they have to be masters of emotional intelligence. They know that building trust and rapport, it's essential, especially when you're dealing with something sensitive or controversial.
So how do we cultivate that kind of like PIO level empathy? Is that something we're born with, or can we learn it?
I think it's a bit of both, honestly. Some people are naturally more empathetic, but it's definitely something you can practice. It starts with being more aware of our own emotions and how they affect how we interact with others. Then it's about active listening, really trying to get the other person's view and responding with, genuine care and concern.
It sounds like it's kind of a shift in mindset. Like, we need to be less focused on transmitting information and more focused on receiving it, understanding where the other person is coming from, and creating a real connection.
You got it. It's about moving from like a monologue to a dialogue, from a one-way broadcast to a two-way conversation. And that's powerful, not just for, professional communicators, but for all of us.
I'm feeling inspired.
Hmm.
I'm already thinking about how I can use these PIO insights, whether it's having a tough conversation with a family member, pitching a new idea at work, or even just trying to connect with someone, on a deeper level.
That's the magic of this deep dive, right? It's
Oh,
not just about understanding what PIOs do, it's about discovering new ways to communicate, to connect, to navigate all those complexities of just being human.
I like that. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our exploration of the PIO world. It's been a really interesting journey, full of, unexpected insights and takeaways that we can actually use.
It's been great joining you for this deep dive. And remember, next time you're facing a communication challenge, channel your inner PIO. Be clear, be concise, tell a story, and most importantly, communicate with empathy.
Words to live by. Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, keep those communication skills sharp. And remember, even in the most ordinary conversations, there's always a chance to connect, inform, and make a difference.